It's lovely to see so many of you keen to take part in this important discussion, and I'm sure there will be more people joining us. Thank you, Lisa, for letting them in when they arrive. Hopefully this will be a great way for you to start your week. So a warm welcome to IPDA Scotland members and any other members from our sister organisations who were on the attendee list, and hopefully they'll turn up soon. And indeed to all of you. For those of you new to IPDA, we're a worldwide professional association that supports and promotes professional development and learning in education across a wide range of practice contexts, not exclusively schools, it must be said. Tonight's focus, however, is on schools, as we are considering the role of the school-based teacher educator with a fairly activist perspective in the outlining of Linda and Aileen's manifesto. Before we get started, let me outline the structure for this evening. Quite simply, after some introductions, I have a few questions to engage our authors in conversation, which should last no longer than 30 minutes, and the rest of the time for the session is devoted to whole group discussions. Please remember to use your hand up function if you want to contribute, and we'll take a few minutes at the end to wrap things up and share any other updates. In particular, I'd like to share a link inviting you to contribute to IPDA Scotland's response to the national discussion on education. You should be aware that tonight's meeting is being recorded. If this is a cause for concern, please let me know. We will probably download the chat as well, and the recording is likely to be shared on the IPDA website, just so that you're aware. Okay, so let me now introduce our guests for tonight. Professor Aileen Kennedy will be known to all of you, I imagine. She has an international reputation in research and publications focusing on teacher learning and the policy context in which that happens. She is Director of Teacher Education at Strathclyde University. She is Managing Editor of IPDA's in-house journal, Professional Development in Education, and she is co-convener of SERA's Teacher Education Network. Her most important job, however, is, of course, Secretary on IPDA Scotland's committee. Welcome, Aileen. Aileen's co-author and conversation companion for tonight is Linda Bell. Linda will also be known to many of you. Linda is a former primary teacher and principal teacher and is now lecturer in education at the University of the West of Scotland, where she is a highly valued colleague working across undergraduate and postgraduate programmes. Linda has a wealth of experience in supporting induction year teachers, and her EdD research is examining the work of school-based teacher educators and partnerships between schools and ITE providers. Linda's other most important job is as treasurer for the IPDA Scotland Committee. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So I'd like just to kick things off this evening by simply asking both of you, what inspired you to write this chapter?
There's probably a couple of answers to that, because I think there's an answer around what inspired us to get together to try and articulate these ideas. And then there's also the what inspired us to actually write this chapter in this publication. And I think it's a conversation that Linda and I have probably had over many years, actually, that has grown and become, I think, more articulate over time. And so when we got the opportunity to contribute a chapter to the book, which is terrible, I must read its title, and it's quite a simple one too, the Palgrave Handbook of Teacher Education Research. So it's edited by Ian Mentor, and the section editor is Nicole Mockler, who had asked if I'd be interested in contributing something based on my work. And at the time, we were looking at a lot of the MQuite data. Linda and I had been having these discussions, so it seemed like a sensible place for Linda and I to actually articulate our conversations in a way that we hadn't been forced to. That wasn't a very snappy answer. I will have snappier answers later, maybe.
Lovely, though. I mean, inspiration doesn't always come in sound bites, does it? It kind of evolves and kind of recursively goes back in itself and then changes into something else. So I think that's a lovely answer. Thank you, Aileen. Do you want to add anything, Linda?
Yeah, no, just to say really, I mean, obviously everything that Aileen has said there resonates completely with my sort of side of things. Aileen first approached me when I was still working in school, and I've been at UWS in this lecturer role for 2 years now, but so it goes back a wee while actually. The germ of this chapter, I think probably, Aileen, about 2.5 years, perhaps, something like that. But Aileen and I have known each other for quite a lot longer, because, oh gosh, about maybe 7-8 years ago, I undertook the Supporting Teacher Learning PG Cert at Strathclyde, and that was really the sort of start of my sort of journey into thinking more deeply about matters around how teachers learn, and then progressively through my school experience, particularly how teachers who work in that mentoring, supporting role with student teachers on placement, and indeed with probationer teachers, how their learning needs are met, how they perceive themselves or don't perceive themselves, which is a whole other story, as school-based teacher educators. It had become a prevailing interest for me in my professional practice in school. And as you can imagine, since I have come to work in UWS, it's become even more of an interest, because I'm regularly in contact, working alongside teachers in schools when we're sort of having our students on placement. So I think Aileen and I think we're in many ways, we're kindred spirits on this subject. We share many ideas in common, and it just seemed like a wonderful opportunity to almost sort of set out and legitimise, I suppose, in a way, something about which I think we both felt and do feel really strongly. And that wasn't a snappy answer either.
A sign of what's to come.
Okay, so I'd like to ask you now a bit about the chapter itself. You seem to be using the book chapter to make clear policy proposals. Can you clarify for us what it is that you're suggesting we need to do concerning this issue?
Well, I mean, I think if I had to sort of sum it up, I'm going to try and make this one a wee bit snappier, I think, Katrina and audience. I mean, I think it's really about taking what we know from research gleaned over a period of many years, what we know about the role of the people that we call school-based teacher educators, and really use that research to improve that role, or the way it's enacted, as much as possible, because I think there are so many at the moment inconsistencies and difficulties with the way the role is enacted in schools. There's a lot of room for improvement, and there's been, I think, a sort of a long period where it's as if the sort of same old has really been happening in schools, school-based teacher educators, and I think we really feel it's time for a change, and that we think that there are things that have happened, which I'll invite Aileen to expand on, in Scotland in education in the last couple of years, that would seem to perhaps open opportunities for things to be improved.
Yeah,
okay.
In many ways, it actually goes back a lot further, doesn't it? In that when we were looking at the policy context, the kind of recent-ish historical policy context, if that doesn't sound like a contradiction, it's clear that we've had 2 or 3 quite overt policy attempts to do something about this, but yet nothing significant has happened. So when we looked at, what we tried to do was to look at different kinds of evidence. So obviously taking into account the fact that we both have our own positionality in this field that lets us see things in certain ways, but there's also policy evidence and there's research evidence internationally and in Scotland that we think when taken together, points to 5 key things. So I guess in answer to the, what do we need to do, we're actually being bolder than we would usually say there are 5 things we need to do. One is to reshape the discourse, to be thinking conceptually about school-based teacher educators rather than simply mentoring. That if we're going to do that at system level, we need every new teacher, so ITE and induction, to be accessing some kind of basic level of education around supporting teacher learning. That we need some level of expertise in this in every single school, so we need a lead school-based teacher educator. That this cadre of people need to have access to education, so we're suggesting the 4th priority, a master's level pathway for this. And the 5th one is that we need to find a way to properly value school-based teacher educators, so that's through time, status, and a commitment to their ongoing learning. So we're quite clear about what we would like to see done.
That's great. Thank you both. I think the whole conceptual piece about thinking conceptually about that. Some people might argue that this has been conceptualized in certain ways, but it just seems that there are certain other parts of the jigsaw just haven't been put in place in order to really develop that in the way that some policy has seemed to be intended to go, if you see what I mean. I think it seems to be that there's a bit of intentionality about what this role should be, but there's still a lot of things missing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's clear in the words, but it's not clear in the deeds. And therefore nothing will happen until the deeds are part of the policy as well as the words.
And I think we're all so familiar, with that mantra in Donaldson about all teachers should see themselves as teacher educators and be, I think you said, trained in mentoring. Aileen's clenching there at the T word. But if we accept that that's a laudable aim, and perhaps, I don't know, maybe there's some area for debating that, but if we do accept it, then we've still got an awful long way. That's over 10 years ago, and we've got an awful long way to go. And I think it only takes, anecdotally, if I may use an anecdote, it only takes a conversation with students to realise how far away we are. Just this morning, I was thinking about this meeting today, when this morning I had a meeting with my postgrad family of students. So it's about a dozen students with these family groups at UWS. They've just finished a placement in primary school. And so we were basically doing a sharing session. How had everyone got on? And it was such a snapshot of the variety that exists, across the country, in terms of their experience on the, kind of receiving end of working with school-based teacher educators, which ranged far and wide from some school-based teacher educators who had, given them, they'd engaged in really sort of rich professional dialogue on a daily basis. They'd given them verbal and written feedback, to some who had said that was fine at the end of every lesson and that was the end of it, to some who were, I'm sorry to say, openly, distant, or even worse than distant, hostile, in 1 or 2 cases. So, there's such a range there, I think, isn't there? And lots of interesting questions to be asked about, what's the background there in each of those different styles, each of those different approaches to the role.
Yes, indeed, Linda. I'm just thinking about, that mantra that it could become, what is it they call it? Is it a sword of Damocles? Something that can eventually defeat you. That all teachers will be teacher educators. I just wonder. I wonder if anyone's ever regretted that statement, because we're so far away from that as a reality. And to think, that these students you're talking about will shortly be those teachers who are expected to be teacher educators. It's not too far away when, they will be the ones that will be expected to perform this role. So yeah, I think there's lots and lots of issues.
I mean, we do know, I was going to say, I was going to point out very briefly, I mean, we do know that it's, air quotes, in the standard, in the professional standard, there's an expectation as well. It isn't just down to, you know, what Donaldson said. There's an expectation that, you know, that teachers will involve themselves in supporting the education of student teachers. But I think, again, lots of questions to ask about how that could be nuanced in different ways, you know, or different levels, perhaps too.
Okay, thank you both. Aileen mentioned there that she was being bold in positioning this as a manifesto. And I think it does reflect a certain activist kind of perspective when you use that as a term. So I'd just like you to elaborate on that, Aileen. Why is this a manifesto?
So Linda and I actually did spend a long time talking about this, so I guess the starting position was we both want this to be more than just a publication on our CV. We wanted to write something that might speak sense. We wanted to produce a warrant for our conclusions. And so usually, I guess I'm so used to writing as an academic with my nuanced conclusions that this might suggest that we decided we were going to step away from that. And because, in part, I guess, because this is an edited collection rather than a peer-reviewed, I mean, it has been reviewed, but not blind peer-reviewed in the same way as a journal article. But actually, it gave us a bit of permission to perhaps not follow the standard kind of genre, if we could say there was a standard genre for academic peer-reviewed articles. So we want to do something with it. That's the point. We want it not just to be a chapter, and that's why this is important to us. That's why we're intending to send this work and our comments to the national discussion, for example. So we wanted it to also, I think, we wanted it to stand out as something slightly different to just a research review, because as we note in the chapter, you know, there's no lack of research around how this kind of work might be conceptualized, but somehow it speaks to other researchers rather than to people who can actually make a difference in policy terms. So yeah, we wrote this, but we're also talking about it. So I will lobby, and I do lobby, you know, colleagues in government and General Teaching Council. And in fact, it was a conversation with Pauline Stephen from General Teaching Council last week that made me think we must make sure we get this recorded. So I want us to be able to share it. So it's about how we look for these kind of activist spaces in our academic work. Where can you write somewhere that might make a difference? And then you can't just write it and leave it and hope it makes a difference by itself. You actually have to do something with it to bring it to life. And we're conscious that by saying, here's what needs to be done, boom, 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 we're setting up something that someone may come back and go, okay, so number one, no, number two, why? But I think we need that level of conversation in order to actually move beyond just a cycle of recommendations and conceptualization with no action.
Okay, thank you. Activist spaces, and, you know, using this kind of work within all our activist spaces, I think, you know, I think there's quite a lot could be done there. When we think about, you know, where we could go back and revisit the ideas that you're presenting in all our activist spaces, would be a nice idea.
And hopefully that means that it's not just a case of us saying, here's what we think, and everyone on the call says, that's brilliant, I'll go and tell a friend. Well, actually, that would be nice in a way, but in order to really make progress, we need to engage with it, but what about? So for us, this opportunity is one of these. You know, where are the holes in this? What do we not know? What's less than convincing? We need to know that, as well as to be able to say boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Okay, so thinking about the timing then, why do you think this is the right time to propose a manifesto?
There's the big word, isn't there? reform. Anyway, sorry, Linda. Your
No,
turn.
I was just going to say, well, I suppose in part, it goes back to what Aileen and I both said a couple of questions back, and it's that there's more to there's a second part to this answer that Aileen will probably elaborate on, but I mean, I suppose it's in part that there's just so much background here, you know, that there's a very long-standing, do I want to say problem? Anyway, issue, situation, that problem, that's fine, okay, I'm allowed, that remains, you know, unacknowledged, unaddressed, unchanged. And, you know, I think that we really, you know, we just feel that enough is enough. We can't go on like this, you know. It's not good enough. It's really salutary and somewhat depressing to read material going back several decades and think this could probably be written now, you know, things about the experience of teachers supporting students, or the experience of students of being supported and or not, or whatever, you know, and we just feel that we cannot go on indefinitely like this. If we want to have an initial teacher education system that's really doing the best by our students, you know, and ultimately our pupils and our children and young people, then real improvement needs to be made. It's not really an option to leave it as it is.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually I mean, the policy context is ripe, but obviously from what Linda's saying, it's been ripe for many years now for us to do something. But when we started working on this chapter, we had no idea that we'd be in such an intense period of reform. And in many ways, that makes it even more timely that actually if structures and systems are changing, which is often one of the reasons why, you know, people don't want to make a policy change, because it then impacts on everything else. If everything else is up for grab, then now is the time to do it.
Absolutely.
Our research findings from the MQuite project, the Measuring Quality in Education, in initial teacher education, sorry, I'm kind of over-egging the remit there, all of education. Some of them we write about in the chapter, but all of the findings there that in any way deal with partnership tell the same story, and that's contemporary findings, you know, from within the last 2 or 3 years. So for me, the research context and the policy context have actually never been more right.
Okay, good. It does seem like a very happy accident that you had started this. You had started this chapter with this idea. Yeah. And the starting point actually predates, you know, the onset of all the reforms, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Katrina, about things take a while to germinate. I mean, just when Linda was talking earlier about being on our supporting teacher learning course at Strathclyde, I had wanted to do that for many years, but kept being told nobody'd want to come on that kind of course. And then Donaldson came along with the only recommendation I ever remember off by heart, which is the same one that Linda remembers, around all teachers being seen as teacher educators. And that then was the context that allowed it to flourish. So I think you need patience in this game as well.
Yes, indeed.
And there have been, of course, attempts to improve things. It's not, I mean, I was very negative when I was speaking a few minutes ago there. It's not that people haven't tried, you know, there have been experiments, for example, you know, Glasgow University and Strathclyde University both attempted they had sort of pilot projects in about 2011, 2013 to have a different approach, you know, sort of based on the, what do you call them, professional development school model in the United States, to make a different sort of partnership between universities and schools, have sort of hub schools, almost like, you know, the sort of like teaching hospital model, that sort of a thing, you know, but in schools. And part of that obviously was aimed at recognising the school-based teacher educator role more, and enabling those colleagues to work more closely with university-based teacher educators. But those models, those pilots, although I think there was lots of merit there, they didn't bear any kind of sustained fruit, ultimately. And I wasn't looking at all of this. I wasn't involved in any of those, so I'm not really very knowledgeable at all about, what was the kind of, follow-up to those, rather than just them allowing them to wither on the vine. I wonder, did anyone say, what have we learned from those? What can we capitalize on? It seems to me that they just kind of faded away. But I thought it was important just to mention that there had been some, I think very laudable experiments, I think, aimed at improving things.
Yeah, indeed. And I wondered if anybody's here who was involved in the Glasgow model. Did they call it the clinical model?
Yes, and it was
Yeah.
I don't know, it wasn't exactly an acronym, it was GWTI. It was like GWTI, and the Strathclyde one was SEPI, SEPI, was that right? Yeah,
So I don't know if anyone's got any experience of either of these models that they could potentially share with us. But yes, I do remember presentations at SERA, things like that, and then it has gone very, very quiet. So it'd be interesting to know what happened there, if anyone can shed any light on that. I think we're going to move on to a question now, which is really about the actual process of writing, because there'll be many people here who, will be involved in putting publications together, will be looking for some, maybe some guidance or advice on how you go about writing a joint publication. So can you share any of your experiences of the process of joint writing? As it has been suggested, this can sometimes be challenging.
It can be, and I think the fact we're both here and willing to do this together suggests that we felt it wasn't too horrific a process. I'm saying that with some trepidation in case Linda's got a different view than this. But I suppose one thing is, when you've never written with anyone before, well, with a specific person before, that no matter how well you know them, actually you never really know until you enter into that writing relationship. But I think we were very clear from the outset about what we were each bringing in terms of our expertise to this. And then we were clear that Linda's currently really deep diving into the literature as part of her doctorate. I've been working with the MQuite data and have done some of the kind of policy background work. So actually between us, we knew we had component parts.
Yes.
But we also were really careful about saying, I'm writing this bit, you're writing this bit, we're going to meet here, we're going to do this, we're going to share this by then. And we didn't always keep to deadlines, but we did always meet when we said we would, just to keep a bit of momentum. So I think, first of all, it has to be someone that you respect and won't have massive conceptual fights with, but although a bit of challenge is helpful. But in some ways, I think we did as best we could in terms of actually planning it. But actually, I would say some of it is just, you don't know until you try it with a new co-author. Yeah. That's maybe not helpful to everyone else, but...
Well, I'd never done it. I'd never done it before. It was completely new to me, working with somebody in that way. I mean, the first thing was I was just so, I'm not going to lie, I was just so chuffed to be asked. So that was really a pleasure and an honour, really, to be asked to co-write something with Aileen. And I was very lucky in lots of ways that I did have quite a lot of material already, and Aileen's absolutely right. I mean, we didn't really have any bother in kind of working out who was going to do what. We could see that the chapter was going to fall into certain categories, certain sections, and it seemed quite natural to demarcate those sections along our particular tranches of sort of expertise and what we could bring to it in terms of what we'd been studying, and to a certain extent what we already had some material on. So a lot of my bits were based on writing that I had done already, and I obviously had to go back and revisit, reshape, read more stuff. It wasn't just a rehash, that I was building on what I had. But yes, we did, Aileen's right, mostly down to me. Sometimes we didn't meet at the times that we planned to meet, and we had to.
I think we had equal responsibility for that.
but and of course it was all on. It's interesting, Aileen, isn't it? I don't know, we had no option because everything was very pandemic-y, so everything was on Zoom. But I guess if we'd had the chance, I think we would have been meeting together in person as well at some point, probably with a glass of wine in our hand, or one in each hand.
Who knows what the manifesto could have been.
Exactly, but we had to do it all. It was all done remotely, and it was a constant process of, I suppose, not constant, a process of sending each other bits, cobbling things together, meeting and reviewing, and somehow we got there in the end.
And actually the pandemic bit and doing all of this online, in some ways it's a more efficient process than experiences I've had in the past, where you send each other versions and you annotate them, whereas we would quite often just put a bit of writing up on the screen and look at it together and make some changes then. So in some ways that actual co-writing rather than divvy up writing was a bit easier, I think, doing it online.
In real time kind of writing.
Yeah.
And in terms of time, how long did the process take? I mean, what is it? But just to give people an idea of, the duration of this kind of a process.
I think if we're honest, and we are honest, aren't we, Aileen? It's important, yes, that there was a bit of a lag time, I think, from the initial idea, and then I think there were lots of other things going on, I think, in our work and all sorts for a while, and then there was a sudden sort of realization of a deadline. And I mean, I don't mean it was like next week or anything like that. It was months, a good lot of months, But what do you think, Aileen? I'm trying to remember, how long did it actually take?
I honestly don't think I could answer that question. I think from the first invitation, at least 2 and a bit years, but it goes in kind of spurts of, here's the deadline, here's the deadline, the deadline, and the first draft, and then a bit of relief because someone else had to deal with it, so we did nothing for a period of a few months, and then it came back with some amendments to be made. So it is an interesting question, Katrina, but I really don't know that I could quantify it.
I mean, obviously it was really helpful for me, not having been in that situation before, working with someone who's very experienced, because it meant that Aileen was very good at diffusing anxieties about, she would say things like, well, there's that deadline, but actually we can probably have a wee bit more time, that'll be okay. And so that obviously not indefinitely, but that was very helpful, and it stopped panic. I think so.
Just thinking about it, actually, Linda, it seems to have been a very it's been a very fruitful partnership, obviously, but it must have been quite a nice induction into writing for publication for you.
Yes, it was. It really, I mean, it couldn't have been. It was fantastic. I couldn't have asked for more in terms of, obviously we talk quite a lot about mentoring in the chapter, but in terms of me being mentored, I couldn't have asked for more in terms of having Aileen sort of guiding that process for me. It was fantastic.
Lovely. Another lovely byproduct, shall we say, of the whole
but
process.
But absolutely not all one way.
No,
I could not have written a chapter like this. I don't have that depth of contemporary knowledge of the literature on mentoring. I mean, it really is, it seems like to me, when you're able to work with someone you can work well with, it's just so much better than anything you could ever do by yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and to dip back into the chapter as well, I suppose, you know, I talk in a section about, you know, the concept of educative mentoring, you know, whereby the mentor, if you like, sort of perceives themselves as a learning partner, you know, and perhaps it was more like that, Aileen. Do you think perhaps we were certainly both learning, but
yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting. That's a term that came up at the weekend at the IPDA conference.
Would that be Elizabeth White by any
yes,
chance?
indeed it was. It was Liz White who was presenting.
Knows our literature
with our,
yeah.
presenting with IPDA Scotland. So great. Okay. So just getting back then to our questions. This one's really about what we know about school-based teacher educators. What do we know about them that is important that you could draw out of the work that you've done? What is important about school-based teacher educators?
So, I mean, I suppose we could talk about that in broad terms, and we could talk about it in more Scottish terms, I guess, as well, couldn't we? I mean, we know that, for example, you know, the literature tells us that, and has told us for many years, that people who work in that role usually find it a very rewarding experience. Maybe not usually, but often find it a very rewarding experience. You know, that they're driven by an urge to, you know, help to sustain the teaching profession. We know from the literature, it recommends time and time again that school-based teacher educators benefit from good professional learning, quality professional learning, and that there isn't enough of it. We know that it's a complex, multifaceted role. You know, we know lots of general things like that. You know, and we also know that, generally speaking, school-based teacher educators don't always identify as school-based teacher educators, that there's sometimes a bit of I wouldn't say an identity crisis, but, you know, they don't really, they think that teacher educators are the people at university. And actually that's often, if you read a paper about, if you see a teacher educator in a title of a paper, it will almost always be about university-based teacher educators. That's one of the things we would kind of like to blow out of the water, I think, and make sure that we would love school-based teacher educators to have pride in the role that they're undertaking, you know, and recognise themselves as fulfilling that really important role, because at the moment, and again, this is not just Scotland, this is borne out internationally, they don't always value it, even though they're doing this valuable job. They're inclined to be quite diffident and over modest about it.
And I think, I mean, that also points to what we know from a lot of the literature around there just not being a shared understanding of what this whole project's about. And so, you know, we're talking about teacher educators and who they are or aren't, but if we don't know what we mean by it, then it's actually difficult to have a conversation and talk about the same thing and mean the same thing. I think one of the other interesting things that we know from a Scottish perspective that I think's fascinating and problematic in the same way is that 91% of our respondents to our MQuite survey who are mentors or those overseeing students and probationers in their schools, 91% of them had undertaken their own ITE in Scotland. And so many mentors or school-based teacher educators, in the absence of really good contemporary education in that sphere, are drawing on their own personal experiences and folk theories. So actually what we're doing is just perpetuating what people thought happened to them years ago.
Right.
So it's really difficult to inject new ideas and new perspectives and new ways of thinking or talking about it when we've all grown up in the same assumptive world.
I wonder if we've got any teacher educators among the participants who might want to add anything here. Kenneth, you're clearly sitting in a classroom. I don't like to put the spotlight on you, but if you've got anything to add, we'd be delighted to hear from you.
No, definitely. I'm just enjoying listening. To be fair, I think it's really. I look forward to actually reading the chapter properly. But yeah, definitely just trying to take as much of it in as I can.
Are you a school-based educator yourself?
I am.
Are you mentoring?
Yeah, I
mentor
well, from sort of probationers and student teachers and obviously members of staff as well, my principal teacher curriculum. So I've got a lot of that, and I'm currently doing a coaching for success sort of thing that I can see it tying in a wee bit with them. The GTCS registered as part of the mandate from up above me.
Right.
Well, there somewhere.
Interesting. Derek, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hello everyone. Sorry, I got caught up with the day job, so I was a bit late. We were talking about this very thing this afternoon in terms of how the school-based element of this and the practitioner element, and I'm looking at it through the English context, but within the market review in England, the in-school placement mentor is referred to as an expert colleague. And we get a lot of the placement mentors in school which don't see themselves as an expert colleague. They see, because I don't know all this theory stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, but you've got to look at it through a practitioner lens. And so our challenge as a ITT provider is to provide the access to the research within an easily digestible form, which then can be discussed between the trainee and the placement mentor. And then the placement mentor can go, well, okay, well, what will that look like in your year 10 geography class? And right. And it's that contextualization in terms of what happens within the classroom and that weekly mentoring, which enables that translation between they've done this work centrally in their central training. How does that actually correspond to what they're doing in class? So the challenge for us is working out how we can get the mentors conversant with the language to start with, where they said, oh yeah, we did some of this 20 years ago. Well, things have moved on since then, and it's how we've managed to knock out of particularly our primary mentors talking about VAK learning styles, but that took years. And you'd have these little isolated pockets, and you're going, you see it written in trainees' assignments, and you go, sorry, where did you get that from? No. And you're trying to unpick where they're getting some of this. So it's a bit of a sort of imposter syndrome. Some of our mentors don't see themselves as an expert because they don't have an MA, or they're not engaged in research, or some of them are engaged in like practitioner research groups. But say you have a lot of practitioner knowledge of how to translate X into what it looks like in a year 3 classroom. So that's the challenge which we're looking at the moment.
It's
because
another
mentors are spinning several plates at once, and they're doing this as amongst a number of other roles, and there's never enough time for them to actually be able to translate and just to take a moment to think. Like if we're looking at impacts of deprivation on pupil outcomes, what's that look like with my year 10 class, which my trainee has taken over to do part of their practice?
Yeah, I think the expert colleague term is an interesting one, because it begs the question, expert in what?
Exactly, that's what I'm struggling with, and I'm struggling to translate that for them. Because
I think it's not just about contextualizing knowledge or theory, it's also about being expert in knowing how the trainees, to use your national context term, it's about how they are supported to learn as well as what they're learning. So the expertise bit's interesting. And I've often thought about that argument about, oh, when were you last in a school? And apart from the fact that, well, actually, I have been in one recently, which is not an adequate answer. But I think I have to think about my expertise, and I don't think I would want my expertise to be exactly the same as my colleagues who are also involved in teacher education's expertise. It's about how we bring all our expertise together to benefit the early phase student teacher.
That multi-layered expertise in different aspects, which we talk about a team around the trainees. So you might have a senior mentor who does like seminar type work with the trainees, who's got a greater understanding of evidence-informed practice. So they would contextualize, so we would give them a resource in terms of a piece of research like Education Endowment Foundation Meta Research Summary. And then they would use that on a seminar type basis. So you've got lots of people with different forms of expertise, which is helping to do that professional formation. And it's that triangulation, which the mentor, the senior mentor, the lead mentor within the school, and then the central training team. And then alongside that, we have the vast bulk of ours will also do a PGCE. And so they'll have master's level input from the university, which provides the PGCE as well. So a lot of the headache for me is synchronizing when different elements of the training are coming in. And for those people who are not doing a PGCE, how do we get them to think critically about their own practice, looking at models of criticality? So, yeah.
We've got a few really interesting comments bubbling up in the chat here, and Stuart's hand has been up for a while, but after Stuart, I would quite like maybe Barbara, Lynn, or somebody else has been mentioning Donaldson.
Susie had a question as well, I think. So.
Who had a question? Sorry?
I saw Susie had a question.
Susie,
Susie,
that's right, it was Susie. So we'll take Stuart's question and then maybe go over to the people who are frantically chatting away. Thanks, Stuart.
Yeah, my question is really about the definition of school-based teacher educator. And you've touched on this already, like Linda, I think you mentioned the GTCS standards, like the actual statement in the standards, and this is the CLPL standard because I think it's the one that's most appropriate, is that the teacher should lead and contribute to the professional learning of colleagues. And then there's comma, including students and probationer teachers. So, you know, student and probationer teachers are a subset of the professional learning that teachers, and you know, I know that Barbara's commented about Donaldson and the mantra about all teachers being teacher educators, but unfortunately I haven't had a chance to read all of the chapter in detail, but it does seem to very much focus on school-based teacher educators supporting teachers in initial teacher education and probation. But you know, given that, you know, in a sort of large secondary school, you know, even the 5 in service days, you know, that's about 400 or 500 teacher days of potential professional learning that needs to be led and supported. You know, from my observations, it's a very similar situation to what you've been describing just a few minutes ago about mentors relying on their own experience of, you know, when they were a probationer or a student teacher, in terms of them then supporting other teachers. Have you given much consideration to that wider role of school-based teacher educator in terms of supporting all colleagues rather than just those that are at the early stages of the career?
So we have, in terms of one of the priorities is around having a lead teacher who is expert in this area in every school. And that is so that that person doesn't have to first line mentor all students and probationers, because that wouldn't be possible, but that they would be a source of support and expertise for the school staff as a whole to draw on. So that's absolutely in there, but we did consciously try to focus on the early phase because we think the warrant is more powerful there. And the danger is we water it down and then it's less it has less punch or less power behind it. But you make a really important point, and we absolutely would see that as something that would boost professional learning across the school as a whole.
Yeah, I agree.
A huge question though, Stuart, actually.
Yeah,
it's a really big question. That's a really good question.
It is.
Yeah, there's maybe one of the gaps that you were asking for earlier on, Linda, Aileen. Yeah. Do we want to go back to Susie, Lynn, Barbara? Interested in Donaldson, problematic. Barbara saying the complexity of the roles of SBTEs or university-based teacher educators. Both roles are understood and under-researched and maybe oversimplified. Barbara, do you want to say anything about that? You're lurking. There she is.
Thanks, I'm lurking. I'm coming at this initially. I've been looking at this very thing in Donaldson myself, coming at this from the university teacher educator perspective, and it's interesting to see it popping up here. And really, my question is, as it says on the tin, question or comment rather, and I'm very interested in others' views. But to me, what is no doubt a laudable aim for in the review is to me very problematic and doesn't really serve a purpose, even as a call to arms. My first concern being, should all teachers aim to be or want to be involved in supporting students and teachers? That comes from a contractual perspective, a standards perspective, and possibly a everyone is different kind of perspective. So I can't see that being a helpful aim, but from our perspective as teacher educators, it's a problematic statement because it does not recognize the complexity of both roles. And if we are all struggling to position ourselves, whether school-based teacher educators or university-based ones, even the language around both roles is a quagmire, then we can't possibly, well, maybe I should tone it down a bit, then possibly a comment such as that from Donaldson is not something we should be spending a huge amount of time trying to achieve. I think it is misplaced, and I'd love to hear others' views on this.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Is it a distraction that we are maybe spending too much time on? Susie raised the issue of choice. Who chooses to be a teacher educator? Who has choice? Can you choose? People do choose. Some people are told.
Yeah, I think this is the literature would tend to confirm that there's not a lot of choice in it, that there's some quite primitive approaches, I think, to allocating teachers to that role. And again, I think this is borne out in, literature very broadly, that there are definitely, and we know this happens because we see the results, we hear the results from our students. Sometimes teachers are basically told, you haven't had a student for a couple of years, so it's your turn, or there's no one else, we're getting a student, there's no one else that can do it, or someone was going to do it and now they can't, so you do it. And sometimes, these things can work out okay, and sometimes not. I think it's really, I think it must be very hard if you are a teacher in school, if you feel that's an imposition and you don't feel equipped for it, you don't have the time for it, so we are not in any sense judging, I hope, school-based teacher educators who are kind of pushed into that role or have it imposed on them and subsequently don't necessarily do a great job, because there may well be lots of very valid reasons why that's the case, and that's really, it must be very tough for them in lots of ways. But there are some people, conversely, that absolutely love it. It's their thing, and they have an inclination towards it. And in my own, I was just going to digress briefly, in my own school experience, I tried to cultivate, if you like, a group of colleagues who were particularly interested in fulfilling that role. And I devised a kind of professional learning programme, I think, which was quite organic. It changed and was quite responsive to their own particular needs and wants. And I did my best in school to make sure that was not imposed on colleagues who were not in the right place at whatever time to undertake it. But that was that was all a bit unofficial. That was kind of Linda's hobby, if you know what I mean. It was just in school, nobody asked me to do it. It was just something that, and it was fantastic actually, because the teachers involved, I think, really did get something out of it, genuinely fulfilling it. You know, it was a positive experience for them. But I know that there are lots of pressures on schools, lots of pressures on individual teachers sometimes to take it on, and not necessarily the support or professional learning or recognition or any of these things that we would like going alongside.
I think it's interesting that also very often what seemed to be a positive reason for choosing or inviting or compelling a teacher to be a mentor is that they're a really, really good class teacher, and that this is seen as, you know, what we would be looking for first and foremost. But there is some interesting research that says that actually makes less difference than how good a mentor you are. So the point about should early career teachers mentor other teachers, I think it depends what you're asking them to do. Because I know that some of our teachers on the when I worked at Edinburgh, the MSc Transformative Learning and Teaching, that'll have woken ML up in case I ask her a question. So ML is the programme director for that. But we did do work with these students around what is an observation for, what kind of purposes might you observe, what would that mean you had to do, say, watch, not say, not watch. We encouraged the students to peer mentor or peer coach, actually not peer mentor. So actually I think many of them would be in a really good position to coach a student within a year or two of being out. Now they might not know all the insider info about how the school works, but we know that even though we have named mentors, generally other people just kind of end up organically going into that role. You know, the idea that one person can perform all the mentoring and coaching tasks required is just not terribly realistic.
But from what I understood from your chapter, though, Aileen, Linda, is that there was a kind of key facilitator role within clusters that that supported mentoring within schools for the mentors and the students. Is that right? And the inductees or students.
Do you mean in the Edinburgh example?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So every student would have a kind of traditional mentor or cooperating teacher, but for because the students are placed differently, they're not placed on a one-to-one matching through the student placement system. They're placed in a cluster of schools who have opted in to work with the programme.
Right.
So they then go to that cluster, and they're then placed across the primaries and secondaries in the cluster. But there is a cluster tutor there who is the link between the schools and the university, who supports mentors, who coaches as well, and who works on some of the assessment parts on the university bit of the programme as well. So it is a very different model.
And moving towards the more kind of formalisation of that role.
Yeah,
I think,
in that they are required to undertake an element of master's level studying on how teachers learn.
Okay. Anybody else got anything that they want to add here? We've had a bit of chat about the choice issue, about probationary teachers being asked to support student teachers, which has raised some concerns. Barbara says that's not allowed in the Highlands. Hope it's the same elsewhere.
Trina, I don't think that it's necessarily something that is allowed, but it is something that we're increasingly seeing happening. And yeah, it's a real concern indeed.
Yeah. Has anyone had experience of this?
Of a probationer teacher support? I wonder if
Lynn's nodding her head, goodness.
I have.
Oh my goodness. And both Lynn's, oh dear me.
Going to visit a student who was placed with a probationary teacher who hadn't even been in the school for very long. She hadn't been there from the beginning. So, and it didn't end well. Kind of, and you can see that was hindsight rather unsurprisingly, but it was very unfortunate all round.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Lynn. Unfortunate all round. So nobody came out of that well.
Lisa, can I bring you in here? You've got a question?
Okay, I'm gonna try to put that camera on. Let's see if it's gonna work. Oh, right. I have to. Well, I have.
There she is. Hello. Hello.
Wow. Okay. So let me just lower my hand as well because I will forget it. I have. Well, thank you very much for it's lots of food for thought here. So I really appreciate it. There are so many levels to this seminar. I suppose there is that level about writing and how you developed this chapter together. There's the discussion we're having about who, like the practicalities of who mentors in schools and who should and under what conditions. And then there's the big question that you have raised with your manifesto. There are 5 things that need to be done. And I have, I don't know where to start. Let me start from the mentoring. Maybe naively, my view on that would be that I think it should be this mentoring. Like I like Aileen, I like what you said about how you did it in Edinburgh, where you kind of prepared, you started your students on the way to become mentors, because mentoring can take lots of different forms, and it can be the peer mentoring, and then that can morph in different ways. So my, as I say, possibly naively view is that every teacher should be a core, one of the core roles that teachers should mentor others. And somehow I think that should be written. That's, as I say, my view, and I can be shot down, it's fine. I think it should be written in the role description, and it should be written in the standards as well, that teachers should be doing that, taking on responsibility for the next generation of teachers. So, but as I say, maybe that is a discussion and a debate for another day. I wanted to go to the big question, which is about your 5 things. Something that has frustrated me a lot over the last several years is the kind of the talk that we do in academia, you know, and we do that through maybe what we say to our students, especially when it is like I'm doing master's work for many years now, and it's like we're working with postgraduate students, many of whom are teachers, practicing teachers, and we're asking them to write 5,000 words essays. Why? So I have been very frustrated, and I'm like, I don't know that this is working, because is it a case of we're getting people to jump through academic hoops to get like the weird letters that they can put under their names and have fancy photos, with fancy hats? I don't know. I have become increasingly very frustrated. And what I think is that when we're doing like the master's level work with teachers, with educators, I'll put it more widely, I think we need a manifesto for that, maybe, Aileen, and maybe that's the next chapter. We need a manifesto to say, how can we facilitate the learning of these colleagues, really, of these teachers, so that it's not about how to use words like furthermore or the aforementioned, but on how to develop skills, research-informed, evidence-based skills that they can use to make a difference. I feel we are not making much impact. That's what I feel. And I feel that perhaps one answer to this question, how we can engage mentors in schools, is about us, staff based in teacher education institutions, finding ways to work with schools. Now, to be honest with you, when this clinical model was announced, I had some hopes for that. Of course, we didn't do it, UWS didn't do it, but I heard that they were doing it in Glasgow, and I had some hopes for that. I haven't looked at an evaluation. I don't know if there is, and I don't know what happened there. But I think we need to keep chipping away, to find a way so that we work better together. So that what I think it was Derek who said before, well, it's like, okay, at university, you talk about the theories and you look at research, and then you're in the school and your mentor in the school can help you see how these ideas, how these findings might manifest in a year 7 class, for example. So I'm going the long-winded way because I think I found an opportunity to just air my grievances around this issue of, are we making an impact? What is the point of what we do? And I want to go back then to your 5 points, and I say I would be absolutely fascinated to hear what specific suggestions you have, because Aileen and Linda, of course, I'm sorry, I'm saying Aileen because as I look, Aileen is in front of me. Linda, no, ignoring you. So Linda and Aileen, I would be very interested to hear what suggestions you have, because I do worry that policymakers won't spend that much time. We will say, okay, we think this is not working and this is not working. We think 5 things need to happen, but I think it might be perhaps more helpful to have some suggestions. So here are 3 ways that this one thing can be done, and here are 3 other ways that thing number 2 can be done. And yeah, I'm doing a Dr. Seuss poem here, but what I mean is, unless there are specific suggestions, I would worry that your chapter might gather dust somewhere, and that would be a real shame.
I totally agree. And there's one very big specific suggestion actually that for me, I thought was going to be a solution, a partial solution to this, which is, and we talk about this in the chapter, is the lead teacher posts, which are specifically designed to encourage, reward and value expertise in schools without promoting teachers in a managerial route. And the fact that that pathway is split into those lead teachers with a curricular focus or a pedagogical focus or a policy focus absolutely suggests, and in fact the SNCT handbook, where it outlines the lead teacher framework, talks about or gives an example of the kind of mentoring or supporting teacher learning. So I think right now there's an absolute need for the lead teacher framework or the career pathways framework to be out there and to be funded and to be used, because otherwise we're going to have a dearth of teachers with that kind of expertise staying in schools. It will help retention, it will help job enjoyment, commonly known as job satisfaction, but I think we should be seeking enjoyment rather than simple satisfaction. And it'll hold expertise and grow expertise in schools. So I would love to see that. I think it's a solution that's already there, and the only thing that isn't there is the money to pay for the lead teacher posts. But quite frankly, you can't keep having a system built on goodwill if you're not prepared to pay for it and to support it and to outwardly value it. And if we keep being told that ITE isn't good enough and that what on earth are these probationers doing, the answer is, well, we can fix that. I honestly think that money invested in supporting teachers to be good at teacher learning and to support each other would possibly be the cheapest, biggest win of all the potential solutions out there.
And Lisa, I'd like to come in there as well and say I completely hear you. I was fascinated by what you were saying there about, I think you feel, I don't want to overinterpret, but it seems to me you feel a bit conflicted about the value of, maybe some forms of master's level learning. Why are they writing 5,000 word essays? What good does it do, etc.? And although, I'm sure there are always better ways that can be devised, of teachers, or indeed anyone at all, being able to show the depth of their knowledge, understanding and learning than lots of 5,000 word essays. What I would say, and Aileen and I are as one on this, is it goes to the business of status of these colleagues, and they have virtually no status or recognition at the moment. And I think we feel strongly that they deserve it, they should have it, and that one way of them getting that status would be to have some form of recognised learning. Bearing in mind what you're saying, obviously I'm very, as I say, very interested in your reservations about what form that actually takes. But if we think this is important, and we do, if we want these teachers to be recognised, and we do, I think that's in order to give them one way of giving the sort of credibility angle more oomph. It really does reside in ensuring, and it's not just, it's so not about piling on yet more stuff. We all know that in so many walks of life, so many professions, we are being asked to do more things, but not necessarily asked to stop doing certain things. There's just an endless accretion of more. But this would be, again, about making room for these teachers to do that really valuable professional learning.
Interesting. Stuart says lead teachers might be a bit of a unicorn. Given the current financial climate, it seems, there's a solution there ready to be offered to this problem that we've identified this evening, that you've identified so eloquently in your chapter. But the barrier seems to be...
Lead teachers is an ideal solution to the problem, and again, there are obviously different ways in which lead teachers could be used in different roles, and in many ways there hasn't really been any great specification as to what these roles ought to be. But I think it was Lauren had commented as well about not having seen any that the SNCT decided on creating these roles, and not all of them are school-based, but I think there's very, very, very little evidence that local authorities are going down that route. But I think I would very much like to see lead teachers with this sort of remit going forward. So I think as part of the national discussion, there is an opportunity to influence, perhaps.
And this is a good example of not being able to just change one thing in isolation. But I can't remember the number because numbers don't stick in my head, but someone recently told me how much money is spent on the teacher induction scheme. And actually that could be repurposed into supporting lead teacher roles without a massive amount of additional resource. It might not be sufficient, but there is money there that's notionally devoted to that kind of work. So could we look at how we use that money, and could we think about using it differently, perhaps?
Yes, exactly. It's interesting, Lisa, I'll bring you in a minute. But it's interesting that the history of that kind of promoted but non-managerial role, senior teachers, charter teachers, it's been very checkered, hasn't it? It's never actually stuck at any level of the structure over time, over like, you know, a long period of time. So why is it such a problematic part of the structure?
Because it costs money.
It costs money, but you know,
it's money, and I think there's accountability pressures that, you know, they've got to be seen to be doing something for the extra money. And not everybody can agree what that extra thing ought to be.
Interesting. Lisa, do you want to come in? I think you're the only one yet.
I'll come in for just a moment there, just to clarify a point. Well, Aileen and Linda, thank you very much for your responses. I just want to make a point there, Linda. I don't want to throw away the learning baby, the master's level learning baby with the 500 essays bathwater. What I was meaning to say is that absolutely there should be master's level learning, and absolutely there should be recognition, and there should be opportunities for teachers who want to engage this way. But I think it might be more fruitful if we work together, schools and school-based teacher educators and teachers and lead teachers and everybody, if we find ways to do it so that it can make an impact, so that the assessments, for example, they are not like an individual 5,000 word essay, which just in many cases, sure, there are opportunities there perhaps for integration of knowledge and some criticality, but given the pressures under which teachers are, it's in many cases what you see is just try to put a few things together to pass, which is fair enough, and I understand it. But what about if we go together then, and instead of doing our learning, say, in the university or only in the university, we went to schools, we found a way to work with schools, and through the work that we do, then we award the program some more perhaps work-based learning, and finding ways to recognize at that master's level work-based learning. I know that Katrina and I were sitting together and we were talking, remember Katrina, a few Fridays ago, we were talking about, you know, how students should be bidding and, you know, and kind of getting thinking. And have group research, students and supervisors just getting their heads together and working on some research that could perhaps make any difference, that could address a specific issue that might be relating to the school or local or national level. So I just wanted to clarify, just in case, especially because this is recording, I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying no.
And I would just want to point out that lots of that work does happen, and that not every master's course is assessed by a 5,000 word essay. I think there's lots of really innovative work out there which is genuinely about different ways of showing criticality, and most importantly being able to deploy that criticality in your work context.
Yeah, I loved what you said there, Lisa, about, you know, sort of joint, you know, collaborative research, students taking part as well. I think that's a really interesting subject. I mean, Aileen, the state of partnership working between schools and universities is not a particularly pretty picture, you know, and Aileen could quote you chapter and verse on that from MQuite data as well, about how the partnerships are perceived from the school-based teacher educators' point of view.
Okay, we're coming to the end of our time here. I just want to flag up what Barbara's mentioned here in the chat. There's a model going on in the Netherlands, and I actually saw this today, and it was Liz White who sent it through, and there's a fantastic website, and it's all in Dutch, and I couldn't make much sense of it. So I would really like a conversation with Barbara, who might be able to talk me through it at some point, because it looked amazing.
Yeah, I'll keep my translation fees very low for you, Katrina.
Thank you.
No
is this
problem
the work
at all.
that Liz has been doing with, is it Miranda Timmermans?
Yes, it came from Miranda. Yes, it came from Miranda. So that's something that, you know, I think certainly within the IPDA community, we might be able to make use of, investigate.
Yeah, it's definitely worth having a look at. It's quite refreshing to see in the Dutch speaking areas. So Flanders, Netherlands and Flanders, they've combined the association. It's an actual professional association for teacher educators, and it's very refreshing to see.
Excellent. I think
this
that's
the formalization, the celebration of the profession, of and their professional pride. And this is who we are, and this is what we do. Oh, and these are the standards by which we hold ourselves to account. Okay. And so on and so forth. It's very interesting to have a look at.
I think that could potentially be the basis of another IPDA conversation. Let's work on that one, shall we? Now, I think it's probably time we should start winding things up. We actually missed out a couple of questions, but the last question was really about the barriers and challenges that you know, we might encounter with this manifesto being taken forward. And I think we actually managed to do that question justice in our free-ranging conversation. So I'd just like to thank our guest speakers, Linda and Aileen, for a most stimulating and interesting and wide-ranging talk, and for sharing your manifesto. I think manifestos, they need to be brought to life in the activist spaces that Aileen mentioned earlier on. So I think it's incumbent on all of us now to take the manifesto with the challenges and barriers that we've all identified and take them to our own activist spaces, whatever that might be. It might be your staff room, it might be just a corridor conversation with someone, it might be a formal meeting, but please take the manifesto and bring it to life in your own activist spaces. There's just a couple of other things from an IPDA perspective. Anyone who's new to IPDA and would like to find out more, please don't hesitate to get in touch with any of the committee members who are here. And that is me and Linda and Aileen and Susie Dick, there's Susie giving us a wee wave. So please just drop us an email, get in touch if you'd like to find out any more about IPDA. I would like to say we do organise regular events. We actually don't organise all that many regular events. We're all very, very hard pushed, I'm afraid. We've agreed that we'll do one main event per year, and we will collaborate with one other association. Now we're kind of involved in that at the moment, and this is our second event for the year. However, in addition to that, Susie runs a professional learning research network, which is supporting doctoral students who are looking at professional learning as part of their advanced study. So if anyone's interested in joining that network, then contact Susie. That's a very lively and active network, and they've had several meetings now, and that work is ongoing. Finally, I would just like to share with you in the chat a link to a form which is asking you to, oh, there you are. There you got a customer, Susie. That's great. Elise, meet Susie, meet Elise. I'm sure you'll have lots of happy doctoral chat together. So yeah, the form it's really trying to collate some responses to the national discussion on the education reforms that Aileen and Linda mentioned earlier. We would like to make an IPDA response that's focused on professional learning for educators. You know, what are our future imagined professional learning needs in this whole scenario? So please, would you take a bit of time and maybe just give us your thoughts on that, and I will collate it and send it in before the deadline, which is the 5th of December. So sorry about the late notice on that, but it would be really great if we could have an IPDA association response. So please just send in your contributions. It's all anonymous, and I will let IPDA members, I'll let IPDA members see what the collated response looks like before I send it in. So other than that, thank you all so much for your attendance. Thank you, Lisa, for ably stepping in as host. And thank you again, Aileen and Linda, for sharing your insights. It was a really enriching discussion and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thanks to everyone. It's so good to get a chance just to talk about these issues and to feel that it hasn't just been written to go online somewhere and never be considered again. So really appreciate
it.
Same from me. Thank you very much, everybody.
Lovely. Okay, well, I think that closes proceedings for tonight. 2 minutes ahead of time. Hooray, enjoy your evening and see you at the conversation.